Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session Powering EU Competitiveness and the Strategic Role of Wind Energy. My name is Laura Casuscelli, Senior Trade and Industry Advisor at WindEurope, and I'm joined today by our guests, Wadia Fruergaard, Senior Director and Head of Policy and EU Affairs at Vestas, Jørgen Madsen, Head of New Markets and EU at Ørsted, Adrian Timbus, Vice President, Portfolio and Market Strategy at Hitachi Energy, and Stephane Tondo, Head of Sustainable Development and Climate Action at Arcelormittal. So, what are we going to discuss today? First of all, I think it's very interesting that we are having these EU Industry Days and this discussion on wind energy in Poland, because Poland is a very fertile ground for wind energy, and is, especially this year, showing how it can unlock important potential, especially in offshore wind. So, as Europe accelerates its green transition, wind energy is not only a pillar of climate action, but also a driver of industrial strength. The demand for wind energy is growing, but the build-out of wind is still too slow. So, today we will explore with our speakers how the sector is performing and where the pressure points still lie today. At WindEurope's annual event in Copenhagen earlier this year, we launched a call for action with 3 main steps for governments to accelerate progress. I would like to hear from Jørgen, what are these actions and how can they support the implementation of the EU Clean Industrial Deal?
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Polish presidency and the European Commission for organizing the entire event. It's very, very nice to be here. It's nice to be in Poland. It always is, and it's my first time in Rzeszów, which I'm sure I pronounced wrong, but it's very nice to be here as well. So the Copenhagen call for action, as you mentioned, Laura, is basically an attempt from the wind industry to be very concrete, be very sharp on a couple of measures, regulatory measures, policy measures that we see as absolutely crucial to ramp up wind energy to the scale that is needed to meet our decarbonization targets, to meet our energy security ambitions, and also to strengthen the resilience and the competitiveness of our industry. I will mention them very briefly now, and then I will deep dive a little bit more on one of them. The first call for action is to implement permitting rules that are already in place at European level, which basically accelerates permitting times and allows for certain derogations in terms of public interest. Germany has done this. They have done it very successfully. You have seen a very big acceleration of permitting in Germany on that account. So what we are asking for is basically for more member states to follow that approach. Of course, permitting needs to be taken seriously. There are legitimate concerns when you do wind farms, whether it's onshore or onshore. But we believe that this is so important in the situation that Europe is today that these processes can be accelerated. The second is electrification. We need electrification in Europe because we can produce electricity with domestic resources, first and foremost solar and wind energy. We of course will also need gases and liquid fuels going forward, but on those we are, as everyone knows, I believe, very, very dependent on imports. And then the third call for action we have is to expand the use of so-called contracts for difference, or CFDs. Here the wind sector came out with a very concrete proposal of asking member states to, over the next 10 years, auction out 10 gigawatts of CFD-backed wind energy, offshore wind energy, over the next 10 years. And why are we asking for that? There are a couple of reasons, but one is that until now, we have really seen sort of a bumpy build-out. I think it applies to wind energy in general, but let me just start with the offshore wind sector. We have seen pretty big build-out towards the end of the 2010s, and we have seen sort of a downward slope, and now towards the end of the 2020s, we see really a lot of planned commissioning dates for offshore wind. And that is, of course, good that things are going up, but then we see again after 2030 that the build-out will most likely go down again. And this is a problem for multiple reasons, but one of the reason I will mention here is that for the supply chain it's very difficult to navigate and to plan and to invest when you have that unstable or that volatility in the build-out. Obviously, the supply chain does not want to ramp up manufacturing capacity if then they end up with empty factory floors because the demand disappears. And at the same time, they also don't want to say no to orders because they cannot keep up with demand, or they cannot deliver on price or on time. And with a more stable sort of pipeline as we see in other parts of the world, we believe that the supply chain will have a much better opportunity to sort of scale to growth. It will create quality jobs in Europe, and then you can say, yeah, but will we need all of that electricity? If we want to decarbonize, if we want to make ourselves less reliant on imported fuels, then there is 10 times 10 gigawatts of offshore wind. I don't want to say it's a drop in the ocean, but it's not nearly what we will need in the end. So there should also be let's say a top up of merchant renewables on top of that, and we will of course need even more onshore wind, etc. So there's really a lot to do for scaling up wind energy to the extent that we need it. And with our call for action, we have sort of outlined 3 very concrete proposals on how to do that.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. So there's still a lot to do, but the EU wants to support EU-made clean manufacturing. And I would like to hear from Wadia. How do you assess so far the EU's initiatives that want to help us upscale as compared to what you've seen maybe in other jurisdictions, since Vestas is a big global player?
Thanks, Laura, and good afternoon. I think there are a lot of good ambitions in terms of scaling and supporting our scaling of clean manufacturing, but the devil is in the details, so it's an implementation problem. And I can give one example. There is the Innovation Fund. There is a lot of money put into this fund. It's directed at innovation and R&D. We at Vestas, we use it for our R&D projects. But it's also earmarked, parts of it is earmarked now for clean tech manufacturing, which is great in theory. But when you look at the methodology of how the money is allocated based on what assessments and methodology, it doesn't really work, because wind is quite mature. So wind manufacturing is a mature industry. There isn't innovation as such. We're not bringing things first time to market. We want to build the things that we know how to build and focus on deployment. And we don't have a negative business case when you look at a mature product and manufacturing a mature product. And the negative business case is one of the requirements within the Innovation Fund. So, the two things just don't add up. Now, when we look at other jurisdictions, and if we look at some positive things in the US, which is a good thing to do these days, we could look at IRA's AMPC, the tax credits for manufacturing. This is an earmarked system which tells us as a manufacturer, if you produce a blade, a nacelle, a tower, whatever it is, you get X, Y, and Z in return. It's extremely transparent, it's very simple, and it's not tied into a bureaucratic process that could last 18 months before you realize whether you get the award or not. So something like an output-based incentive for the EU, like the AMPC, could work really, really well to help us scale manufacturing.
Sure.
May I comment on that? Because I think you raised a very good point there. And I've been listening to earlier sessions here on financing and the strategy of getting there. And if we look at and compare the US with Europe only, we are very much subsidy-like investments. We don't really care so strong about the final outcome. Well, the US is the opposite. What it is the final outcome, how you strive for that, and I'm helping you through IRA or through other vehicles to get there and remove some of your obstacles. But you are always measured on your outcome in the market. Well, in the EU, you are measured on some bureaucratic KPIs. There is a paper, there is something to fill in, and so on. And this is really killing us. Not only wind industry, we are discussing wind industry here, but it's really killing the appetite to go for this public funding. With so many vehicles that the European Commission is putting in place, still they are not the most appealing when we look worldwide.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for sharing also this. Now moving to Stephane. So in fact, the wind industry and steel manufacturers rely quite a bit on each other, because for wind, we need to consume steel, and steel factories need renewable electricity. How would you like to see the interlink between these two industries developing going forward? And what type of constraints to competitiveness do they have in common?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and thanks to the few passionate people we have in the room. Your presence really matters to us today. So, yeah, indeed, we are in a case where the two sectors are deeply interlinked. I would speak even about a symbiotic relationship, because, as you may know, 80% of the weight of a wind tower is made of steel. You can go from the foundations, the monopile, the substation, the tower, the nacelle, even the generator is made of electrical steel. So it's an important market for us. We also have to consider that this every megawatt of wind that we install represents 150 tons of steel. So a 15 megawatt wind tower, it's 2,200 tons of steel. It's 75 armored cars or tanks or Panzer, because today it's the reference for everyone. Let's build for defense. We prefer to build for the future, for wind, which matters most and as a more stronger impact. But steel has also the negative part, which is the emissions, and steel represents 80% of the weight, I mentioned, but between 30 and 50% of the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions of a wind tower. So that's a very important point to decarbonize if we want the whole electricity generation system to be more efficient and more decarbonized. So moving towards green steel is really the future, and the way that we have to go past together. It's really feasible, because we have already solutions to reduce for the plates which are used in the wind sector emissions up to 65-70%, which is major. So out of the 30-50% which still represent on a wind tower, it's quite massive. So we have a very good story. And I want to thank again our partners and customers of Vestas, because we are today in Poland, and Poland is the first place where we had, I would say, decarbonized wind park with the Baltic wind project, where Vestas supplied and we supply the steel. And it's a good example that shows that together we can succeed in making these things move and bringing green electricity also with green steel. But I would say the story does not finish here. Wojciech mentioned in the previous panel that recycling is the first way to have low CO2 emission steel. So using steel that has already been produced and just recycle it. And we will have in the coming years an increasing dismantling of older wind parks. And as I said, if we have 2,200 tons that go in, we can also recover them. And for us, it's also a very high quality product, because it's not a mix like in a car where we have 20 different grades. It's something which is very simple for us, very good. So we also have together to put this new recycling chain in place to make sure that we can build a new circularity story. Then your last and most important question was on the competitiveness, because indeed green low carbon products cost more than classical products based out of fossil fuels. But several studies show that, and even a BCG one, that the overall cost for not a wind tower but a full wind park is around 2%. It's something we will have to deal with. We are an energy-intensive industry, so the cost of electricity really matters to us. But I think 2% is important, but keep in mind that the difference of electricity cost that we have with the US is 100%. With China, it can go up to 150 sometimes. So yes, this 2% matters, but I think it's part of the whole story, and we have to find a way to go around it to make sure that both parts are competitive and that we go in the right direction, meaning decarbonizing not only the electricity, but also what produces the electricity.
Thank you very much, Stephane. Please.
I will have a comment on our addition to this cost, right, and particular business case, because we always tend to compare one-to-one the products, but when we are talking about sustainability, there is also a cost, an indirect cost of not doing it, which today, outside of, we are talking wind again, right, outside of the wind industry, there are other industries that spend billions in cleaning up after the solutions we are deploying in the markets. Those, and simply because they are cleaning up, because these solutions are not sustainable. And we need to make sure they are not making harm to environment, not making harm to the people, to ecosystems, and so forth. And that is a cost in hundreds of trillions that is out there in the society, but someone else is spending. So when we look at the business case moving towards sustainability, we need to look really with the eyes wide open to understand why we need to do it and where the business case is coming from.
Thank you very much for these very precious insights. We'll actually dive back into some of these aspects you've mentioned later in the session. But Adrian, so with wind energy, we also need more grid. So what are the biggest bottlenecks that Hitachi Energy sees in deployment of grid infrastructure and at the pace that is required by the 2030 and 2050 objectives?
Right, so I think all this energy transition, right, is new for everybody. And it's slightly different. Let's take only the territory of Europe. All the grids are different. The development of renewable is different. We have wind in parts of Europe. We have solar in other parts of Europe. We have a mix of wind and solar. We have electrification happening or starts happening in different countries and so forth. Therefore, it's not necessarily a recipe that fits all, but there will be many recipes, right, which the member states can learn one from another. The very first bottleneck I would like to mention is just not going to repeat, but I think Jørgen mentioned that, is speed, right? Making permitting faster, making things, again, remove bureaucracy. If we want to get there in 2030 and ultimately in 2050 to carbon neutrality, we need to move faster. And we need to do everything we can to move faster. But then, if we look at the amount of development that we need to do on the grid side, but also on the generation side, and then later on the electrification side, we also need a much larger scale. Because only in 2024, the world installed 585 gigawatt of renewable power, wind and solar together, which if you think maybe 1 decade, let's say 1.5, let's say 2 decades back, that would have been 585 nuclear power plants to be deployed in 1 year. But it takes between 10 and 15 years to do one nuclear power plant, right? So we gain some speed by changing to new technology, by changing to renewable technology, by changing to modularization and so forth. And we are on a track to improving that. However, what is ahead of us, it's asking us to really increase much faster. And for this, we need capacity to build towers, blades, transformers, HVDC links, lines, everything there, right? And of course, we can build them, but then we need to get that visibility, right, of the business case ahead. Yes, politically, there is high-level ambition. Yes, we are talking about money infusing into various industries to reach the ambition of the policies, yet there is a bureaucracy thing that we need to solve there, which slows things down. So the corporates, right, the businesses will not move unless there is a very firm business case and projection of that market ahead. And for this, we need clarity of that market, and I think Jørgen also touched on that. But let me touch a little bit on the scale of the investments, right? Because there are two types of that. One is manufacturing. And we at Hitachi, right, in the last 3 years invested $3 billion, right, in our manufacturing footprint worldwide. And very good part of that is here in Europe. However, we also need investments in people, in human capital. And this you don't go and get it off the street or even not off the school or highest university or PhD degrees and say, now you need to go and design this. Because they have never been exposed to that. This has a lagging time, right? So there, this investment in human capital, it also needs to propagate a little bit more into the educational system, get the corporations working closer with university to prepare them to run faster when they come into jobs. So this scaling up then comes from the goods and human capital to increase our capability to scale up.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I will move now to another topic. So, in fact, as Europe retools its industrial strategy for a net zero future, we hear more and more also about the necessity to have resilient, clean energy supply chains. So we've seen with the Net Zero Industry Act that there has been the introduction of new criteria in renewable energy auctions, and resilience is one of those. And it will mark a shift in how we source and secure components for our wind farms. These rules aim to reduce the over-dependencies that we currently have for our supply chains on a few global suppliers, and aim at strengthening our industrial autonomy. So now we will listen to how these new requirements on resilience may reshape investment decisions, supply chain strategies, and also innovation priorities across the wind value chain. I would like to hear from Wadia. What new opportunities and challenges do you see from the implementation of the resilience criteria going forward?
Challenges and opportunities? I think the resilience criteria, again, it's a good ambition, and again, the devil is in the details in implementation. Because essentially, what EU wants to do is to get the wind industry to reshore the stuff that we are building outside of the market, right? Why are we building things? Why do we have factories outside of the internal market? It's because it's cheaper. It's because it makes strategic sense to put it there. And the wind industry for the last 45 years has developed a global supply chain that is as economically efficient as possible. It provides agility and flexibility so that we can have the things that we need when we need them. And now we are asked to bring all that stuff back to Europe. It's a good ask, but there are no carrots, there are sticks. And the sticks come in import restrictions. And what happens when you touch a 45-year-old supply chain, you're adding complexity, you're adding costs, and you're adding risks. So what will end up happening is prices will increase if we have to move manufacturing back to Europe before it is an organically feasible thing to do. So again, it would be better to incentivize the behavior of companies like ours instead of coming with restrictions in terms of regulations.
Thank you very much, Wadia. Adrian, to what extent do you think innovation in grid technologies could contribute to both resilience and strategic autonomy?
Yeah, I think if we look at the grids, right, there are not very sophisticated elements there, other than you have transformers, which are, hundreds of tons that transfer the voltages. Then you have breakers. I think the problem of breaking currents have been solved many, many decades ago. And now the new main technology that is emerging in the grid is based on power electronics devices like HVDC, like STATCOMs and so on, which gets a little bit more into a bit of complexity, but at the same time requires more innovation, but provides more flexibility into the grid. What we have, I mentioned the investments we have done at Hitachi in terms of capacity, and some of these investments here in Europe are basically in HVDC, because we are deploying a lot of projects with this new technology to connect particularly offshore wind farm, but also to interconnect countries, because these are very big infrastructure solutions, like you connect 2 gigawatt of power between one endpoint and another. And then with the new solutions that we released last year to market, that we have multi-terminal HVDCs, you basically can expand that to 5 times 2, so you have 10 gigawatt of power into one project that you can deploy at once and connect 5 wind farms into a center grid. So, but the investments we have all made is here in Europe, and actually is in Sweden, in a beautiful place called Ludvika. It's not the end of the world, but you will see it from there. And the challenge that we have, and this is where HVDC, let me give you the background, HVDC was invented by Hitachi, ABB, former, actually ASEA company in Ludvika in 75 years ago. We kept the place there, we grew it up as the business grew up, and now we needed to expand it. This is a town of 5,000 people, and we needed to add another 5,000 people. You imagine the real estate development that has to be done there, right? Then imagine where do we get that clever engineers, because it's the most probably sophisticated grid technologies that we put in the grids today, to bring them from the rest of the world, because we don't have the talent in Sweden, we don't have the talent in Europe, bring them from the rest of the world there, in Ludvika. And then, you know, so these are challenges, right, for all of us as I think we are sitting here, global companies operating across the world, right, to make sure that we do the right investments in, let's say, our home ground and leveraging the European footprint, but making sure we are competitive in Europe, but we are also competitive in the rest of the world. Because there is a Chinese wave, right, of investment and putting a lot of companies in the market to conquer various industries. And then, of course, there is an American wave of companies taking over some sectors like IT and so on. So Europe right now is neither in one nor in the other, right? So, and we still try to find what it is, the differentiations that we have. And to me, I don't think we have found it, not even with the ambition of sustainability. So all those rights need a lot of thinking, but it's also a lot of innovation in the way we are going to drive this energy transition in Europe.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Turning to Jørgen, how will the Net Zero Industry Act new resilience criterion affect project planning, both in terms of implementation and also administrative costs going forward?
Yeah, thank you for that question, which is very good and very difficult to answer at this point in time. Maybe to also contextualize the answer a bit, let me just say a few words about Ørsted and what role we play in the value chain, because we are a renewable energy developer. We are the biggest offshore wind developer in the world. We buy most of what we use in our wind farms from, let's say, a supply chain that is North European, Northwest, Northeast European. So we go to Vestas, for instance, and we say we need some wind turbines for one of our projects, and then Vestas goes out and sources everything that they put into their wind turbine. So we actually don't have that many first-tier suppliers, but of course, in order to understand our business and our suppliers, we have very deep insight to our tier 2, tier 3, and so on suppliers, the ones that supply components and products to our suppliers. We are currently constructing an offshore wind farm here in Poland, together with PGE, the largest electricity generator in Poland, and we're doing that, of course, in the Baltic Sea. We are also planning one more offshore wind farm. And you asked about sort of supply chain or supply strategies. And that affects directly, the Net Zero Industry Act affects directly how we do that supply strategy for the second wind farm that we are planning. Not the one we are already constructing, because there we have done most of our procurement already. But for the next one, it will most likely be subject to the Net Zero Industry Act requirements. So what does that mean? Very briefly, a couple of weeks ago, the European Commission presented its first, let's call it import dependency assessment. I don't think that's the official title, but that's what it is. So under Net Zero Industry Act, Article 29, the European Commission is obliged to every year do an assessment of what are the import dependencies on single third countries of different components, technologies, and so on. What the European Commission found was that there's a very big dependency on permanent magnets in the wind sector. 93% of the permanent magnets that we use in the sector originate in China. That means that for our future projects, there are some derogations and so on, but let's keep those aside at the moment. We will again go to Vestas, or one of Vestas's competitors, and we will say, we need your product, we need your turbines. However, by EU regulation, we are now required to tell you that you can only use 50% permanent magnets from China. The rest of the permanent magnets you will have to find somewhere else. And I just said that 93% comes from China. So whether that 7% can be grown up to 50% in the time that we need, I don't think I'm the right person to answer that, but it's obviously a concern we have, that when we are met with that requirement and we then have to pass that on to our suppliers, then we need to have a very serious conversation, both with our suppliers and with regulators on what is actually possible here. Because the ambition of the Net Zero Industry Act, I think we can all agree is a good one. We need more resilient supply chains. We need to scale up manufacturing capacity in Europe. But the question is, with what speed is it actually possible? Because the alternative is, of course, that we will not build it, because if we cannot be compliant with EU regulation, then we cannot build our offshore wind farm. Again, there are some derogations, so it's not as black as white as I'm describing it here, but for clarity, I hope that it helps. So we will see. It will very soon, it will apply from the 1st of January next year. So we will see what comes from it. And then maybe just one small thing I want to add. There's also a lot of good things in the Net Zero Industry Act around speeding up permitting for manufacturing capacity in Europe, for instance. There's also sort of the basic idea of introducing more non-price criteria. We're not per se against that, because competing only on price can also have its disadvantages. However, non-price criteria, no matter what, they add complexity, and that add costs into the project as well. So there's really a lot to say about the design and the implementation and finding the right balances when this is to be implemented.
May I? I maybe wanted to just add one more thing on the complexity of the Net Zero Industry Act resilience criteria. It could be 27 ways implemented, because each member state is able to decide on what percentage of my auctions do I apply the criteria. And do I put it on pre-qualification, or do I put it as award criteria? So from January 1st, as you say, Jørgen, from January 1st next year, whatever auctions we have in 2026 in whichever member states, they will have that opportunity to apply it. I think we know France has an ambition to put it on 100% of their auctions at pre-qualification criteria, which is probably, you can say, the strictest implementation level. Some member states seemingly are unsure that they will, get started at that level, but they maybe take the minimum. But this uncertainty, not knowing how they will do it, causes a significant amount of challenges for the supply chain. And how do you plan then for these permanent magnet issues and all the other challenges as well?
Thank you very much to both. So we hear complexity, but also uncertainty being quite concerning. I would like to hear from Stephane, what are your views on how the resilience rules may support or actually hinder the decarbonization of your industry?
Well, I will start reacting also to what my two colleagues say, and the good thing in the panel is that we don't necessarily need to agree, otherwise it would be a bit boring. First, I think we have generated a monster for the reasons that we have just been discussing. On one side, it's too constraining, very difficult to apply when you look at the criteria. And on the other side, we said, okay, member states can say, just do it on 6 megawatt on 30%, meaning 70% can be out of the scope. Or there are so many backdoors on the price, others, to make the possibility for member states or developers to escape that rule, that at the end, it's something which is complex, will make us have nightmares during the night and be inefficient at the end. So what we would have liked is to have a better coordination of the needs on two things. On the EU local content, we heard this morning that it's something that the Commission finally has in mind, because you cannot force some industries to decarbonize and not the others. I think for us, it's not an issue to invest in a steel mill in China. Every time we do it, we are blamed for it. So we want to invest in Europe, but we need to have a market also in Europe. That's why we would have preferred to have something very simple. I give you an example. So far, we have still 70 million ton blast furnace production in Europe. In 2030, roughly 1/3 should be decarbonized, so the steel-intensive industries could have a target of 1/3 of low-carbon steel in 2030, and something increasing in 2035, 40, but that we have both, on both sides, a same target to use greener product, instead of trying to find mechanisms that combine at the same time trade measures, price compensation. So it would be much easier and give the visibility we need. Then on the local content, here too, I would like to remind that the wind industry is one of the sectors that benefits the most from state aid through the CFDs, the CCFDs, both sides. We think that, and it's valid for all industries, including ours, when there is public money involved, there should be a share of EU content. That's very simple. I don't say 100%. You have to be realistic. The case of the magnet is a full nonsense. Once the supply chain has gone, it is gone. But today, we still can supply 80% of the steel from Europe. So let's set a lower target, but let's set a target. And if someone wants to get outside, no issue with that. No state aid, that's all. At the end, it's public money. It's ourselves as taxpayers. We put it from our money, from our pocket. So why supporting investments in third countries? Lastly, when you look at the last part of the NZIA, which was on the resilience and the main specific components, all this complex legislation, I think here too we have a good example, like for the trade defense instruments, of a regulation which is a kind of post-mortem diagnosis. You have been shot in the back by the imports, or the supply chain has already moved, and then you make assessments and need to correct. So here too, it's better to have regulations that say, this is the target for the wind industry, you have to keep this portion in Europe. This is the target for the steel industry, you have to still manufacture this amount to supply your customers, but not doing something where we will discover years after that the battle is gone and is lost.
Thank you very much. Would you like to react to that, Nadia, or we move on to the next question? Jørgen.
No, I can say very briefly. I think it's a very fair point that you raise, that when there are public money involved, which is not always the case, but sometimes it is the case, then there is more discretion to set different requirements. We just ask that those requirements are transparent, and they are comparable, that they are predictable, and that they're measurable. Those type of words, which may just sound like words, but they are extremely important in terms of keeping costs down. And then exactly as you said, but I'm happy you made that nuance as well, that if we are to set those type of requirements, they need to be realistic in terms of what we can produce in Europe. And maybe we can start producing permanent magnets in Europe, and maybe we can scale it up very quickly. No problem. That would be great if that happens. But right now we don't know, and that's the concern.
Thank you very much. So we hear lots of overlapping pressures. We have to upscale, we have to decarbonize and stay resilient. So I would like to hear maybe from Stephane your views about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And because it will enter in its definitive regime into force already next year, I would like to hear what the steel industry thinks of that. Is it more a stick or a carrot, in your views, in the EU steel industry's decarbonization process?
Yeah. I may say neither nor. You know that we have the ETS. We are, like other heavy emitting industries, subject to the CO2 taxation. This leads to a lot of distortions and possible circumventions. You know that even when we export steel or steel products in the future, we will be penalized. It's not just us, it's our customers too, which produce product in Europe made out of European steel. They will have penalties on the international market. So that's the first thing, which was first shocking in the sense that this was not even foreseen, no solution for such an impact. It's more than 10% of our sales which go abroad, which weren't abroad before Trump decided to play with different games. So it's heavily impacting. There are also a lot of weird things in terms of circumvention. We know them, we produce all over the world. So we told the Commission, if you do that, we simply produce in China what we have with EAFs, we send that to Europe, and what is still produced with traditional and is emitting, we keep it there. That's what we call production reshuffling. At the end, it does not change anything for the global carbon balance, but what comes into Europe is greener. So as no taxation, no CBAM, so it distorts anyway the European producers. So to summarize, we need a CBAM because we have higher CO2 costs that others do not pay, but it needs to be a system which works, which is not the case today. And one other element that we need to consider is till where we include the downstream, which was initially foreseen in the ETS, in the CBAM, but has been stopped for practical reasons. We also need our customers, the wind tower manufacturers, to be protected at a certain point, because if they produce in Europe, have constraints, and productions abroad do not have the same, we may lose this production in Europe, and it's a lose-lose solution. So, to answer your question, it's just, if it works, it's just the system it should be, meaning something which puts a kind of level playing field, but it's neither a carrot nor a stick for us. It's just a kind of way to make sure we are not penalized ourselves by our own rules compared to importers.
Thank you very much, Stephane. So considering also these measures or instruments that are supposed to incentivize the greener raw materials, Jørgen, how do you foresee scaling up the use of green steel in the European wind energy infrastructure?
We in Ørsted, we have committed to using green steel in future projects, and sort of done that as part of our Scope 2 and 3 strategy towards 2040. So we will start implementing that, especially after 2030. Green steel, as in more general, I think we need to look at green steel in comparison with all other types of decarbonization measures. Abatement costs, society-wise abatement costs, and comparison with other sectors need to be part of that discussion. Green steel has sort of become a very topical word, or let's say phrase. But of course, it needs to make sense for the steel industry, and it needs to make sense for the taxpayers as well. So we will need it, but we will also need to find the right balances. Then you ask about using steel in the wind sector. and I already explained our commitment to it, and I think we should start to implement that. But at the same time, I think the wind sector represents 7 to 10% of steel demand in Europe. So it obviously doesn't make sense that it's only the wind sector that drives demand for green steel, construction, transport, and so on. Maybe especially construction, because they're not as exposed to global competition as some of the other sectors, and I assume they're the biggest customer in the steel sector as well. So yes, for the wind sector, but it needs to be a societal-wide demand drive as well. And for that, we are looking into this new concept. I don't know if it's a new concept, but it's at least more to the forefront now on lead markets, sort of identifying certain end users where you set quotas for green steel, which is good for greening the steel industry. It's good for us in terms of the steel industry then demanding more green electricity, which we of course like. But we should not do these things for the electricity sector. We should do it because we have an obligation, a global obligation to decarbonize, and we have obligations to reduce our energy imports. And then, of course, both for producers and consumers of green steel, there needs to be de-risking instruments in place. So yes, absolutely, green steel is needed, and it's needed in the wind sector as well. But we need a broad and balanced decarbonization roadmap for that.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. Talking about electrification, Wadia, do you have any views in particular on the business case for electrification going forward?
Yeah, and I think this is a WindEurope number, but I have here that 23% of energy consumption in Europe is coming from electricity, or electricity is 23% of energy consumption. So it's still low, and the understanding is that it's expensive. So we need to somehow find a way to support industries to electrify. And again, here we can talk about incentives, and I'm not up here suggesting everything should be incentivized, but if we believe that we need to have stronger business cases, and these industries are saying, it's too expensive, I want to do it, but it's too expensive, then it isn't the answer to try and figure out how we do that. And the way that impacts us as an OEM is if we have strong business cases up at the top, then as the projects end up, trickling through and come to us, come to Jørgen first and then come to us, then we have strong business cases all the way through. And for us, it's about this viability of the volume that we can then rely on. And everyone has an opportunity to deliver project profitability with a profitable way, and deliver them on time. Because that's a lot of the issues that we are seeing in the wind industry is things are delayed. Our auctions are failing, many are undersubscribed or unsubscribed, and that is down to the business cases. So I think starting up at the top at electrification and demand creation with strong business cases would then support us also landing with strong business cases.
Thank you very much, Wadia. Adrian, would you like to share with us more about Hitachi's role in supporting the decarbonization of Europe's energy infrastructure, particularly through digital and grid technologies?
Yeah, I mean, to electrify, obviously you will need to transmit the power from the generating units of Ørsted with the turbines from Vestas to the load, and could be industrial load of Arcelormittal here or anyone else. And for that you need a grid. I already mentioned, right, building up the grid, expanding that grid to reach into the generating units. This is what is on our highest agenda, right? So decarbonizing the generation fleet and making sure we have the grid infrastructure to deliver to the loads. Now, I mentioned also earlier that the picture moving forward will be a much more complex system that we will need to handle than what we used to handle in the past. Because in the past we had a few generating units very close to the loads and the grid was having a minor role. Now, the generating units are far away from the loads in the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, and so on. They are also volatile, right? They produce whenever the wind is available or the sun is available and so on. And then we need to bring all that where still we are building more demand for electricity. And this more demand can be large facilities like industrial facility, could be also large facilities like data centers. And there is also a long queuing. Right, so this is a matter of security and can end up into national security or continental security when you don't have electricity. And I think all of us have seen on the news the case in Spain that happened a few weeks back, right? So what I wanted to say is this complexity of the system in the future needs to be managed through a very well-designed new system, right? And digitalization will play a role because we cannot control it by simply allowing the current to flow wherever it wants, right? Or wherever is demanded. So we need to make sure that the system is not overloaded. We need to make sure that every load is served to the right way. And this is where, again, digital technologies are very, very important. We are doing a lot of investments in digitalization. And actually, Hitachi, as a mother company, has bought two very big companies in totaling amount of $5 billion only in the space of digital, to cope with all the digital demands across Hitachi businesses, which grid is one of them, but then we also have an industrial business and so on. So some of the very big transmission system operators already start making steps into moving into big digital infrastructure to cope with the amount of data that all is generated across the grid. Let's not forget that smart meters have been deployed, right? So there is not anymore a man going there and putting it on the paper. Now they are sending a lot of data, right, out somewhere, right? So this is stored, then someone needs to use it, right? Then you need to start developing that infrastructure. Then you need to start developing the analytics on that infrastructure. Then you need to start developing decision-making mechanism and processes on that data. And we are working together with all relevant stakeholders to put this in place and make sure we take the right steps in designing, but also defining the operating models of the new system.
Thank you very much, Adrian. So the more we build and the more we may be exposed also to different types of risks, from cybersecurity threats, digital vulnerabilities. Yes, we must stay vigilant to have secure and stable supply chains. So Jørgen, what threats do you see from a project developer's perspective to a secure and stable wind energy industry in Europe, and where would we need additional attention?
I can see we don't have so much time left, so I will keep it really short because I would like to pick up on what Wadia said earlier about sort of the global wind supply chain that has been developed over decades, and now we are seeing, for good geopolitical and security reasons, that we need to reshore some of that supply chain to Europe. That is not easy, but and we cannot reshore, or nor should we reshore everything. But we need to navigate, and I think that's maybe a key word here for the wind sector, but also for regulators. We need to navigate that new reality that we are in, because our supply chain is all of a sudden very, very politicized. But we were used to having a very political discussion around imports of gas or oil and so on. So the actual energy carrier, but now the supply chain has also become very politicized, and that is something we as an industry and regulators need to navigate. And there, my concern can sometimes be that the security angle and the competitiveness angle, which are linked, but they are also distinctively different, that they are sometimes mixed together. Because if we have kill switches in infrastructure in Europe, that we can of course not accept those type of components or those type of systems and functionalities. They should not be in the European market. If we have certain components where there are no concerns in that regard, but there are concerns in terms of competitiveness, then we need to ensure that there's a level playing field. And those two are very different policy measures, and there are also two very different challenges for Europe. So I think I will just leave it at that and say navigating new realities.
Thank you very much. So indeed, we have a few minutes left. Now, I wanted to ask maybe Adrian, since we are talking about level playing field. So the European wind industry is in a technology race with China, and also in research and innovation, there's no level playing field. So how do you think that research and innovation can help us safeguard our technology leadership in wind?
Yeah, I think if we look beyond wind on every industry out there, the winners of those industries and the leaders of those industries get there through innovating new solutions, right? So I think innovation really for me stays at the core of the competitiveness, first of all, of the wind industry in Europe and beyond Europe. I think I want to add first one point to Jørgen's one, that we cannot think of having a European market for one industry. This is not flying anymore in the world of today. So whatever we do in Europe and whatever we aim for in Europe, we should think this has to be competitive in the global market. Otherwise, we will fail. We will fail from where we start. So if we are not competitive in the global market, we will not have enough volume here for anything to really be or create that market and be competitive. Therefore, right, coming back to your question now, the biggest competitors in wind is coming really from China, where they are, as I said earlier, investing a lot of money and putting a lot of companies building up wind turbines. And if we see also the announcements they make and so on, they have, the largest wind turbines. Now I think we are trying also to do it with the European companies. However, right, we are still having an edge there in terms of experience, in terms of know-how and talent, but we need to start increasing, right, this edge with more investments into it, right? Investments that go again on different layers, right? Firstly, let's look at where we are right now in terms of deploying and start investing in manufacturing smarter, faster, right, at a better quality. We also know all the Chinese products, and I can tell you, right, they don't have the quality of the Western production. However, it's good enough quality at the right price for some people to buy it, right? So if we only play on a few levers that we have, we can increase the competitiveness of the wind industry. Quality being one of them, right? Pull-through and capabilities and capacity being another one of them. In line with our strategic directions to sustainability, bringing in green steel, recyclable blades, recyclable turbines, everything else, right? Then that creates an additional differentiations, and we can then create a trend in the European market, a trend that we can export in other markets. Because let's not forget, right, by the COP agreement, every country or every big country on this world has committed to net zero by 2050 or 60 or 70, but all of them are there. If we light it up in Europe and show them the way of doing it through wind, through electrification, through something else, then we create a recipe that can be exported in other countries. But again, we need to move very fast. We need to start investments in that, right, and make sure these investments are then easily accessible to many funds of two different conditions and so on. Make a dedicated fund for wind, right? Put money in there, get the industry working well together with the policymakers, with the member states, everybody on the supply chain, and make it happen.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm afraid time is up for us today. We would have so much more to share about our industry. I would like to thank our speakers for contributing to this very rich conversation, and also to everyone who listened to us today. Thank you.